The best way to understand blue mind is to first understand red mind. We're anxious, we're stressed, and that takes its toll. You're going to break down, you're going to fall apart. That's where blue mind comes in. Water is really the basis of life. We are all made of mostly water. We all spent the first 9 months of our lives swimming around in this dark watery pool called our mother. You need water to survive, but you also need water to thrive. Getting us more towards a blue mind state is really important for our personal health, for the health of our families, our communities, and even our country. We get so much from the waters of the world, and we have so much we can give back. And when that connection starts to flow, amazing things can happen.
Hey, welcome everybody. Kevin Green here. Glad to have you tuning in. Really excited to have a short, deeper dive discussion into how behavioral science can help, drive action on the environment. We've got a great group of folks, some of whom you've seen throughout the day so far, and some others who will join as well. To start our discussion, the short time that we have, Jay, I want to start with you. One of the things that we spend a lot of time working on at Rare is distilling the many surprising things about the human species and how we're inspired and motivated and how we can use that to solve big environmental challenges. With Blue Mind, you sort of gave a name to this idea that we're in a different positive state of mind when we're near water. And that tells us a lot about, how we can be healthier and happier as individuals. It tells us a lot about how we can kind of take care of ourselves. But, I wonder what you think. What might it also tell us about how we can inspire action to protect the oceans and other water ecosystems?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's the me part. So when we learn that nature, water, forest, wildlife are good for our personal emotional health, that's motivating for a lot of people. You care about how you feel. But then it expands to the we part, and it actually connects us to each other, that feeling. And we heard earlier today about the fear and the growth modes. We refer to that as red mind and blue mind. But when you're in that growth mode, you're more open, you're more connected, you're more likely to collaborate and find creative solutions. And that's the we part. And then you see yourself, your emotional health as being connected to your environment. That furthers the we perspective. So you go from that me to the we pretty quickly. And then I think really fundamentally, what we're talking about is updating the value equation. So the value equation is broken, and we undervalue water because we don't include the blue mind benefits. And when we undervalue anyone or anything, bad things happen. So when we get that conversation right, the perceived value shifts in a positive direction. And we start to see an ocean as not just an economic and ecological place of value, but an emotional place of value, a place where we get peace and a sense of freedom and solitude and privacy and romance and calmness and contentment and creativity. And I can go on for 100 words.
It seems like you've thought about this before.
Yeah. I wrote about it a little bit, but there it is. And we've talked about this before. We dial that language out of our communications. And at least Lucy spoke about it earlier today so well. When we bring that language back in, it's such an accelerator. It's so dynamic. It's even more fun. And we get out of that fear mode that we tend to often communicate about the environment, and we move into that growth mode. So we move from that red mind to that blue mind in order to avoid gray mind, which is burnout, numbed out indifference. So.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. I love that. That's sort of like, it's the me and the we, and also the idea of sort of recognizing that, it's something that we need for reasons that we may not have, always previously understood. If we can get people to sort of understand that benefit. Just a quick reminder to folks that the view is shifting around. You can always change back and forth from gallery view to speaker view in the top right corner of your of your Zoom if you want to see lots of folks or just one individual. We also have John Whaley from Heartwired. And John, I want to turn to you and ask, you know, a lot of the information we get about the environment tends to be really bad news. And there's plenty of research to tell us, although we don't really need the research to know that it's true, that bad news is just downright demotivating for folks. It can kind of lead us to turn off, or maybe, you know, as Jay says, put us in the gray mind. So how might we harness the blue mind concept and other emotional levers to solve some big challenges of ocean conservation and climate change?
Thanks, Kevin. It's a great question. And one of the things that our research showed was not only showing solutions was incredibly important as we discuss the problems with the ocean. It really raises people's anxiety because they have this deep connection to it, and when they feel it's under threat, they're anxious and they don't know what to do about those anxieties, especially given the vastness of the problem and for many people the vastness of the ocean itself. So when we show people that there are solutions, that's very important. But I want to talk about a specific type of solution, and that's what we call the redemption story. There are examples that we can give to people where we admit that as a species, we made mistakes, we messed up, we polluted our ocean, we polluted the rivers, but that actually we were able to pass laws like the Clean Water Act in the US and make tremendous progress. So there are stories out there, for example, humpback whales coming back into New York Harbor after New York Harbor was decimated by pollution, and showing people that we can be redeemed and that we can make mistakes, but then work together to solve them was incredibly empowering for people to want to take action. It was a model for them moving forward.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, I think people want to, you know, when we really step back and think about it, it's no surprise that people want to feel good, but sometimes, you know, we forget that. And Jay and I were just recently talking about how we get ourselves in the environmental community, we get ourselves in this habit of feeling like we sort of need to be the bearers of bad news. You know, Jay was sharing stories about sometimes people are even disappointed when he gives a talk and he doesn't tell enough bad news because it's this expectation that we have that, you know, everything is just going to hell in a handbasket. But what we know, as you're alluding to, is that, you know, people want to feel good and they get motivated when there are things to feel good about. Lucy, Shay, I want to turn to you now. Looking at the chat box, you gave definitely my favorite response to the "What is your water?" question, which was puddles. So just you win, I guess. I want to ask you, you know, at Rare, I mentioned this before, we spend a lot of time working on levers of social influence. And I know from conversations that you and I have had that this is something really core to Futera's work as well. You know, if we're going to give people a way to change their behavior for people and the planet, we're going to have to make it social, as we say. So can you share a little bit about what are some of the ways we might harness, in addition to some of these emotional levers we're talking about, sort of the science of social influence for ocean conservation?
Absolutely. I thought I might give an example outside of ocean conservation. I also do a lot of work in the fashion and apparel industry. And we have worked with this movement called Fashion Revolution for many years, which it gets consumers to ask brands every year on the anniversary of that terrible tragedy at Rana Plaza, who made my clothes? And the way we worked with a ton of partners to design this was to make it social. So to really lean into this segmentation called the goals, which I'm going to come to in a moment, but to design something that everyone could share online. And, you know, there were the usual things about, oh, it's armchair activism and it's click this, but actually what it did was create this very visible social outpouring of support that we, as lovers of fashion, and again, this is where we can link back to the ocean, us who feel so wonderful when we put fashion on or go to the ocean or go to the puddles, whatever it may be, this is what we would like. And it was a pro-fashion movement. And you could see all your friends and your community sharing. So it really built this sense of large-scale transformational change. And it has actually resulted in many brands giving much more transparency on their supplier databases and things like that. Applying that to the oceans, I think, you know, we are lucky. I mean, obviously at the moment we'd like to be a little bit more socially interactive than we are right now, but we are lucky that we live in this age of extreme transparency and digital awareness. So to use that as much as possible, I think, to show, you know, social movements and tipping points.
Yeah, that's great. And you said something before, you know, about how I'm putting words in your mouth, but essentially, you know, what might be the impact, if this is what I heard, what might be the impact if we were better able to show how many people, in the case of the current, you know, pandemic crisis that we're in, how many people are behaving well, right? How many people are doing the right thing and doing the right thing in order to take care of their fellow community members, or, you know, people around the world. If we were able to make that more visible, it sort of makes you wonder what might be the impact of that, particularly, you know, where I am, the news often focuses on the people who are behaving badly and the people who are really mad about having to do it. And that does something that we use, I know you do as well, that shares sort of the wrong descriptive norms, right? It tells everybody this is what's normal, even though it isn't normal, right? Most people are doing the right thing. And,
yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Good sound common and bad sound rare, always, using your name. Yeah, and I just want to touch on, I touched on this thing called the goals, because that small survey that I mentioned in my talk, where we tested whether people supported radical action in service of environmental and sustainable goals and climate change. We're running again today, and I'm not allowed to talk about the answers yet, but it's coming out very much in a line of support, like huge amounts of people supporting as radical action on climate change and things such as ocean conservation as the response we've had to COVID. And I think there's something changing, because we've used this demographic or values breakdown for years. We've not put it together. It's put together by a team at Cultural Dynamics, Chris Rose and Pat Dade. And it talks about bricks, greens and golds. Bricks being the more traditional types, greens being the more environmental types, and gold being the more, what you might call normal types. You know, people who are turned on by status and success and fashion and all of these things. And we've always said you've got to really lean into that consumer benefit of change, or the citizen benefit of change. What's in it for me? What's the emotional benefit? What's the social benefit? What's the functional benefit of me changing my behavior? And people's values aren't changing. That's just not how people work. But I do think this crisis has created a kind of an agar, a potential for change that we've not seen in a generation or more, that people do want solidarity. People do want community action. People do want us to band together and solve some of these pressing species level challenges that we've not been able to do so yet.
Yeah, well said. I really agree. I want to pull in other folks on our panel. You can see some of them here. You're welcome to, just a reminder to listeners and participants, you're welcome to add comments or questions to the chat box for specific folks, or for just sort of general discussion. Please feel free to contribute questions there. I want to open up to some of the other panelists here. You can certainly volunteer to answer if you'd like. I want to think about, you know, sports psychology for a moment. We heard a bit about that this morning for me. We often think about competitiveness in sports as the source of so much of our achievement, our individual achievement. But, you know, as we know from behavioral and social science, and, you know, and as Lucy shares with us, if humans are anything, they are an incredibly cooperative species. You know, as Lucy said, they long for solidarity. And I think sports really bear that out. You know, what better example is there than a team working together to literally race around the world in a boat? What does the ocean race and the incredible feats of working together that it reveals tell us about how we might think about tackling these really, species level challenges like ocean conservation, climate change, and more?
Can I answer to that?
Sure, please do, Raul.
Hi. So I believe the analogy you're making with the sports mind is that they have a plan, that they have a course, that they have a skipper, that they have a captain, and they have a plan as a team, and they have to work as a team. So I come from the events world. When we meet, we change the world. We say, like, live or virtually, like the Magna Carta or the Declaration of Independence or the DC rally of Martin Luther King. Everything came to life through meetings, and I think it's cool that we are meeting today at this Oceans Race Summit. I think it's super important that we enable more and more people to consciously design events for behavior change, align teams, create that path to the future, and also see behavior, because events are super agents of behavior change, to put them into perspective and to see how you can drive behavior change through organizing events in a methodologically and systematic way. So that's what we are trying to bring to this world, is to have that plan, to go back to the captain, to have that race, to have that strategy, and to have that plan so that people can work together, because otherwise people are doing things all on their own islands to keep in the same category here.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. You talk about all the different roles that people have to play, and what's so important is sort of knowing your role, knowing the contribution that you make to the team, and then also having the common goal, right? In the ocean race, for instance, the common goal is to win the race, and so that can really be sort of motivating for bringing folks together. Anybody else want to chime in on that question of what does a cooperative event like the ocean race tell us about how we might think about tackling things like ocean conservation and climate change?
I have a
Jay,
question.
please.
We were talking sort of right before this panel about the winners and losers, and I see at an event like the ocean race and other sporting events, when the winners and losers of the event come together at the finish line and celebrate the win, that's humanity. Those are the moments that you get teared up and you feel part of something bigger. And it isn't just one winner and a bunch of losers. It's like the celebration of excellence, the celebration of skill, the celebration of life. And you see it at any level. It could be an incredible ocean race, but it could also be a kid's sporting event where the losers are happy for the winners, and that empathy and that compassion comes through. And as a dad, you try to instill that in some way. There are winners and losers, but let's celebrate the journey, and let's celebrate the sport, and let's celebrate the accomplishment of the great winning team. And you see it in surfing, especially at Mavericks, these big wave events, that the winner is celebrated by everybody who risked their life in the wave or on the wave. So that's just a lesson, I think, that carries over from something like the ocean race through John speaking of these deep emotional hardwiredness that we have that is so important to solving these problems. And so that's kind of what comes to mind for me with your question, Kevin.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. There's sort of no one can more appreciate, this is what I'm thinking as I hear it, no one can more appreciate just sort of the beauty and greatness of a win than the person who was defeated, right? And so when that really comes together, it is very sort of moving. I was thinking about, as you were describing that, tennis matches and meeting at the net at the end of a tennis match, to recognize that the winner outperformed, and being able to sort of understand that. John, were you going to chime in with something?
Just quickly on the sports metaphor, and especially team sports, we find when we engage audiences about what kind of actions they can take on behalf of ocean conservation or other political issues, people are different and they need a range of actions that fit the kind of person they are. And when it comes to, let's say, a sailing event, it's a team sport in that people have different roles and not everyone's the captain. So being able to recognize and provide different roles and different actions for people. It is a team effort in the end, but for some people, for example, they want to do something alone. And for example, there's a lot of citizen science activities they can do, like tracking debris on ocean beaches. That is a solo project. Other people can get together for a communal beach cleanup or other political actions in a town hall environment or something. So it is a team sport, but individuals need their own role.
Yeah, well said. Lucy.
Oh yeah, 100%. This personalization piece, I think, is so key to behavior change, and enabling people, whether it's in the form of an online quiz, obviously used to very ill effect with Cambridge Analytica and co, but can be used to good effect. Anything that we can do to enable people to identify what their personality type is, based on those greens, golds and bricks, or whatever form you choose, that will enable them to then choose or have a set of actions presented to them that are based on who they are and how they operate as human beings, I think is really good. We've seen that work really well in many campaigns.
Right. Great. I'm noticing there's another question over here from Lev on this question of sort of focusing on positive behavioral changes. What are your thoughts on how we might better incentivize the media and our social networks to focus on positive behavioral changes? So if we recognize that that's important, as a few of us were talking about, how do we actually make that happen rather than sort of the current focus on outrageous and offensive behavior? Lucy, I'm guessing you have something to say about this, given the sort of work that you do at Futerra and maybe some others do as well.
Yeah, well, I thought your ripple effect earlier was really good. So the highlighting one thing you're going to do and why you're going to do it. For social networks, particularly friends and family, and your personal influence. People very much buy into, why you do something, not necessarily what or how you're doing it. So that ripple effect, I think, is key. And then for the media, years ago, we did a survey of the percentage of media articles on climate change, which were positive or negative, and unsurprisingly, more were negative than positive. But the trick was to find solutions. So I think, again, for those of us who do work with the media or any that do, I was going to say spoon feeding, which is slightly offensive, but giving solutions, which many of which exist out there, which can be covered in a story, I think is possibly a way through.
Well said.
I would add, sometimes when we communicate, we tend to share the solution right at the very end, almost in an afterthoughty sort of way. And at just elevating, just in terms of your communication timeline, elevating that so it doesn't, when you get to the end of the interview or the conversation and you have 30 seconds left and you're like, oh yeah, there's a solution I want to mention. And then it just gets you get 3 seconds of solution. Just elevate it in the timeline so that it doesn't get squeezed out. And as a scientist, I used to do that with my acknowledgement slide in scientific presentations. It usually gets left at the end and I just put it as the first slide, so I would never run out of time to take 1 minute to acknowledge those who need to be acknowledged. We can do that with solutions too. Put them up front or close to the front so they don't get squeezed out when you're running out of time in your conversation or your interview. It's a simple thing. If it is important, which the science suggests, yes, very important, put it in an important place in your timeline.
You've just reminded me, sorry if I can jump in really quickly.
Sure.
We did focus groups some years ago with UK public on how, again, a climate change more than an ocean conservation message, but what order of argument worked. And there was this formula, which was, as you're saying, Jake, vision first. So paint the positive picture of where we're going, which I think is so applicable here to team and motivational sports. Paint the positive picture. then give the choice. If we don't, work really hard to create positive ocean restoration, whatever it may be, we get the negative bit, then give the plan, and then the call to action. So there's this formula of vision, choice, plan, action, which can really help.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because you have to combine sort of that vision and that emotional connection, that positive message, with what do you actually do with it, right? And one thing that we work on a lot is, people just they avoid doing something unless they have to, and so a change in behavior has to be made easy for people as well. And one of the ways that we can do that is just helping people actually plan. There's a lot of research that shows that if we just say we have a plan, if we just say what that plan is, we're much more likely to do the thing. So I talked earlier about this intention action gap, which is that there's a wide gap between what we say we intend to do and what we actually do. And oftentimes these emotional drivers and these positive messages have a really big impact in building our intention to act, our desire to act. And then that needs to be combined with a solution that actually helps us to realize that, to actualize that change that we sort of want to make happen. I think we've got just 1 or 2 more minutes. I'm looking over at the questions on the right, and there's a question about how can we translate the mindset experience of the collective journey. Someone else was talking about marathons and how thousands of people come together as individuals to run in this sort of collective event. How can we translate the mindset of the collective journey, the experience of the collective journey, into ocean conservation specifically? Any ideas there about how we sort of build a collective movement for ocean conservation?
I have an idea on that. There's a super nice book. It's called The Power of Moments, which actually talks about like how can we elevate things out of the ordinary, which a marathon does, right? How can we create a sense of pride? Because that's the accomplishment you have after. How can you provide more insights, and how can you build meaningful connections? So that's an acronym called EPIC, right? So you can this is creating epic experiences. And I think that's crucial for if you want to do stuff. You have to take it out of the ordinary and create moments of pride and build connections and insights. So I
love that. Yeah, we often talk about peak moments, creating peak moments, these sort of epic moments. That's great. Well, that's a great way to end. This was a super short but really engaging discussion. We're going to pop the poll back up there again to see if opinions have shifted at all about behavioral science and ocean conservation. And I just really want to thank again everybody for chiming in. Jay, Lucy, Raul, John, everybody who's listening. Great short conversation, but really engaging. So thank you.